Pandemi COVID-19 yang melanda dunia pada awal tahun 2020 tentu sangat memukul perekonomian. Namun tak semua lini bisnis redup dihajar oleh pandemi COVID-19 ini. Fintech lending atau peer-to-peer lending atau pinjaman online ternyata menjadi salah satu yang berkembang pesat di tengah pandemi ini. Nah, bagaimana fintech khususnya di Indonesia tumbuh di saat pandemi? Insight akan membahasnya. Bersama saya, Desi Anwar.
Indonesia merupakan salah satu negara dengan perkembangan ekonomi digital terbesar di Asia Tenggara dengan e-commerce menjadi industri utama yang mendorong pertumbuhannya. Di balik angka pertumbuhan yang sangat tinggi, perilaku konsumen menjadi elemen penting untuk memahami tren bisnis maupun peluang bagi para merchant, bahkan platform e-commerce itu sendiri untuk terus dapat beradaptasi di tengah pandemi. Menghadapi COVID-19 yang tak kunjung usai membuat hampir seluruh masyarakat Indonesia kebingungan, terutama dalam mengatur finansial. Tak sedikit dari mereka yang akhirnya mengajukan pinjaman online untuk dana darurat saat pandemi terjadi. Kredivo mampu menyalurkan pembiayaan kredit instan kepada pengguna untuk pembelian di e-commerce dan offline serta dana pinjaman tunai berdasarkan real-time decisioning yang didukung oleh teknologi buatan sendiri. Dengan hampir 4 juta pengguna saat ini dan kerjasama dengan 8 dari 10 platform e-commerce terdepan di Indonesia, Kredivo merupakan platform Buy Now, Paylater yang terbesar dan tercepat pertumbuhannya di Indonesia dengan rencana ekspansi ke pasar regional seperti Vietnam dan Thailand. Kredivo juga melayani kelas menengah di Indonesia yang terus bertumbuh pesat dengan bunga yang termasuk paling rendah di Indonesia serta proses pengajuan dan persetujuan kredit hanya dalam 1 menit. Tak hanya itu, Kredivo memiliki track record sebagai solusi unggulan bagi merchant baik online maupun offline. Di Indonesia, dengan penetrasi pengguna kartu kredit dari segmen kelas menengah kurang dari 10%, melalui kemitraan dengan Kredivo, merchant mampu meningkatkan nilai belanja konsumennya.
Otoritas Jasa Keuangan atau OJK menyebut banyak masyarakat yang melakukan penarikan pinjaman dari layanan fintech peer-to-peer lending atau pinjaman berbasis online, khususnya dalam kondisi pandemi COVID-19 ini. Dan banyak sekali layanan e-commerce yang diberikan oleh berbagai macam perusahaan-perusahaan Intech. Nah, sudah bersama saya melalui Zoom CEO dan co-founder dari Finaxel dari Singapura adalah Akshay Garg. Nah, Akshay, hello. Good to have you with us.
Hi, Desi. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, Akshay, you are based in Singapore at the moment, and Finaxel is a financial technology company and based in Southeast Asia. And I know that one of the products that you have operating in Indonesia is Kredivo, which is an online credit application. It's a peer-to-peer lending. But Akshay, we've had over 1.5 years of lockdown. You know, shops closed, the malls are closed, and people have to work from home and do everything from home. When it comes to consumer behavior on the whole, what is the major shift that you've seen throughout this pandemic, especially when it comes to us relying on everything digital when it comes to dealing with our buying and shopping and so on? Tell us a little bit more.
Sure. I mean, first of all, Desi, there's no question that, look, I mean, the pandemic has really, it's been one of the most unfortunate events, not just of this decade, but probably will be of the century, impacted tens of millions of people, right? With sickness, death, losses of livelihood, and so on. At the same time, one of the effects of the pandemic has really been that because of the lockdowns, right, it's really accelerated this wave of digitization globally. And we see that across the board in e-commerce behavior as well, right? So as people have actually been staying in, either working from home or going away, right, leaving their homes in the cities and so on, right? I think generally speaking, e-commerce growth has just exploded. I think recently when the Google Bain Temasek report, which is the go-to report for Southeast Asia for digitization of e-commerce when it came out, I think that claimed that Indonesian e-commerce grew 50% plus last year. In fact, we believe that that number is understated. In fact, the growth rate was significantly higher at 70 to 80%. And we see that in our own data. Credivo is now one of the fastest growing and one of the top 5 payment methods across the e-commerce space for some of the largest e-commerce merchants. So when we look at our own data for 2020, early 2021 compared to pre-pandemic 2019, I mean, we see a number of trends that indicate this major consumer shift. First and foremost, right, as you would expect, as people are working from home, the number of purchases for digital goods, right, top-ups, etc., bill payments has exploded. I mean, we've actually seen that growth being about 100% plus compared to the previous year. We've seen a 40 to 50% growth in terms of segments that relate to electronics as well as home improvement products, whether it's furniture or white goods. Correspondingly, we've seen nearly a 40 to 50% drop in the value of purchases that are happening using Credivo when it comes to fashion products, etc. That makes sense, right? People aren't going out; they're not going to offices, so there has been a big drop in some of those purchases. At the same time, when we look at demographic behavior in our own database, we've actually seen now across our user base that the share of purchases that was previously attributed to the older segment of the population, which is, let's say, 35 plus, right, 35 to the age of 50 or so, in our own database, that used to only contribute about 13 to 14% of all purchase value. We've seen that number go up to about 25% or so, right? Which is basically saying that a number of users who were previously not using e-commerce as their primary purchase mechanism have now actually migrated to e-commerce. So that's a pretty dramatic shift that we actually see in our own database, and it's indicating a secular shift in consumer behavior. And finally, just to round that up, right? I mean, we occupy a very unique segment as a buy now, pay later platform. We're not really a peer-to-peer player at all. We actually operate under a consumer finance license with a product which is very similar to a credit card in some ways. So what we've actually found through our own surveys that we've commissioned directly with our users or through third parties, that as there has been an impact on people's livelihood, right? People have felt economic stress, right? The number of users who've started using Paylater as a payment platform has exploded. Now, whether it's Credivo or some of our competitors, what we've actually found is that Paylater has gone from being almost nothing to now, right, when you survey a large sort of base of e-commerce buyers, 25% plus of those users now say that they've actually used a Paylater product at least once. And they're doing it for a combination of reasons, whether it's convenience or the fact that we are or others are providing credit when people have been facing some economic stress. So there's multiple angles, right? Multiple data points that we're actually seeing, which indicate that this is a pretty big shift in consumer behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. If I can just, parse some of your answers, Akshay, in terms of numbers, you mentioned, it's an exponential increase, especially compared to before the pandemic. Obviously, our dependence on all things digital during this pandemic is absolutely enormous. But when it comes to the actual amount, whether it's over 50% or 80% and so on, what kind of numbers are we talking about? And also, how does Indonesia compare, for example, to other countries in Southeast Asia, particularly maybe not Singapore, but countries like Vietnam and Thailand. Is there any difference or a significant difference in the way the consumer behaves when it comes to dealing with digital transactions?
I think there's a ton of similarities between Indonesia and the rest of Southeast Asia, right? A number of countries have been impacted similarly, maybe not at the same time, but Thailand, Vietnam have also suffered pretty serious lockdowns, Malaysia as well, in the recent past, right? In general, look, there's no question. I think the pandemic has forced a very large number of people to move their primary purchase behavior online. Now, when you mentioned, right, a little bit more in terms of numbers, I mean, Indonesia, our estimate is that e-commerce growth in the country grew by, or the e-commerce growth rate was at least 60 to 70%, significantly higher than 50% that's been previously estimated, right? And what that really results in is a total e-commerce transaction value of about $30 to $35 billion in Indonesia alone. Indonesia is much bigger, Desi, compared to some of the other markets in the region. It is the single largest economy in the region, ex-Singapore, of course, right? Single largest e-commerce market by far in the region, and also the fastest growing one. So in terms of scale, anything in Indonesia would be significantly larger than anything we see in the region. But in terms of trends, I think the trends are very similar across the board.
Yeah, and in terms of the digital transaction itself, in Indonesia, you mentioned that, in terms of age group, of course, those who are more savvy when it comes to using gadgets is normally sort of the younger generation. Can you tell us a little bit more about the demographics of those actually migrating or starting to depend more on using online lending for their credit purposes as opposed to, going to the bank or borrowing money with a credit card?
Yeah, for sure. I'm happy to. Look, I mean, I think, I probably can't comment on everyone else in the market, but we're certainly happy to comment on who we target and what the demographics are of those that we actually provide credit to. As a starting point to your question, though, I might just basically start by spending maybe a quick minute on why there's such a big gap when it comes to credit access in Indonesia. Indonesian banks don't do much unsecured lending. The total number of credit card holders in the country is only in the region of 7 to 8 million. Right now, it might surprise you. It surprises everyone when they actually find out that the total number of credit card holders was about the same even in the year 2007, 2008, before the global financial crisis. After that, the number went down, but it's taken about 13 years to get back up to the same number. In that same period, Indonesia's economy has doubled in size. The middle class has more than doubled in size. There's 80 to 100 million individuals estimated to be in the middle or affluent classes in Indonesia. Yet, at the same time, there's only 7 or 8 million credit card holders, and that number is really not growing. So if you are a 25 to 30-year-old who is in your first or second job, is going to an office in Jakarta, Bandung, Surabaya, wherever else, is earning a salary that's coming into a bank account with a tax deduction, you have a tax ID, you're filing your taxes, 9 times out of 10, Desi, when you actually apply for a credit card, you will be rejected because you don't exist in the credit bureau, because you haven't taken a car loan yet, you haven't taken a home loan yet. But these are really creditworthy individuals. In most other countries, they would be getting credit cards, not with crazy high credit limits, but with entry-level credit limits. So our target segment is really the urban office-going millennials, right? We tend to focus a lot more on what we call the underbanked population. So these are people with bank accounts, but they're just not getting access to credit simply because of the infrastructural bottlenecks in the country. So that ends up being a target segment, and that dovetails very well with the e-commerce base of the country. The early adopters and the mass market for e-commerce has really been the 20 and 30-year-olds. People who are in their 40s and above have generally been late to adopt e-commerce as their primary transaction method. So when we look at our data and we see who are the primary Kredivo users, they end up primarily being urban, office-going, Gen Y and Gen Z, which is to say the age group of 30s, late 20s, mid to late 20s and 30s.
Okay, Akshat, hold that thought. We will continue, but we'll take a little break for the moment. Jadi tetaplah bersama kami dalam Insight with Desi Anwar. Kami akan segera kembali. Ya, kembali lagi bersama saya Desi Anwar dalam Insight with Desi Anwar. Topik kita kali ini mengenai tumbuhnya jasa pinjaman online khususnya pada masa pandemi ini. Lewat Zoom saya sudah tersambung dengan CEO dan co-founder dari Finaxel yaitu Akshay Garg. Finaxel ini merupakan sebuah perusahaan fintech yang sekarang sedang naik daun. Akshay, you talked a little bit earlier about the target audience, and obviously because everything is digital application based, and it caters more towards the urban and the young people, and also those perhaps who want more sort of instant credit, without too much of the bureaucracy and the paperwork. But for our audience who don't really understand, the terminology of fintech itself, things like, peer-to-peer lending and Paylater and so on. So what would you say would be the main difference between borrowing through one of these peer-to-peer lending platform and compared to, for example, opening a bank account or going to the bank? And how does it actually differ when it comes to actually using it? Whether it's the features or the services, what are the main difference, really, basically, from the consumer's point of view, that is?
Yeah, first of all, Desi, the space has exploded in Indonesia in the last few years, primarily on the back of very poor credit access, as I mentioned earlier in this conversation. There's a very wide diversity of players in the market. Now, you mentioned peer-to-peer players. There's quite a few in the market. Part of our business also operates under that license. Our primary business, though, which is Credivo, really operates under a consumer finance license where we built a product which is closer to a credit card than it is to a peer-to-peer loan product. Now, first of all, you're absolutely right. I think P2P, peer-to-peer, has been quite a buzzword when it comes to Indonesian fintech the last few years. Peer-to-peer is a very nascent business model, right? Generally, you can sign up to a peer-to-peer platform, lend, and then a borrower can borrow off that platform. Now, in the vast majority of cases, not all obviously, but in the vast majority of cases, peer-to-peer lenders primarily focus on payday lending and short-term loans, right? Where the borrower will borrow for 15 to 30 days, maybe longer, pay back with relatively high interest. We, on the other side, with Credivo, tend to cater to a very different audience at a very different use case. So the way I would describe it is that credit cards are on one extreme. Peer-to-peer, just in terms of its offering in the market today, would be at the other extreme. Buy now, pay later providers, BNPL, which is another hot trend, where we actually probably sit somewhere in the middle, right? Which is to say that we are sitting closer to the traditional banks or consumer finance companies in terms of the product that we actually offer. And what we're really doing is enabling customers, in our case specifically, to apply for a credit line, just like a credit card, right? You don't get approved by credit card loan by loan. You get approved by a credit card for a credit line. You can keep on transacting as long as you're in good standing. We give customers both payment and term flexibility that they can pay back in full in 30 days at 0% interest, just like a credit card, or then a 2.6% flat interest rate for installments, right? A little bit higher than a credit card, but significantly lower than a number of other players in the market. So the BNPL product is primarily really designed to facilitate e-commerce purchases when a very, very small number of users as a percentage of credit cards in the market, and even those who do hesitate to use them, simply because most e-commerce purchases now are actually happening over a mobile phone. And you and I both know it's not very easy to actually type out, right, all the various numbers associated with a credit card online. So the buy now, pay later players are specifically filling that gap. And we're the clear leader in that space. We started about 5 years ago, and since then we've grown to dominate that space with about 50%, if not more, of the overall market share, driving 3 to 4% of the GMV of the top e-commerce merchants. We're live with 4 out of the top 5, 8 out of the top 10 e-commerce merchants, an approved base which is just about 4 million or so now, which would be about 50% or so of the credit card user base in the country. So clearly, I think, with those metrics, you can see that there's a very, very high adoption amongst the Gen Y, the Gen Z, right? The young urban office-going population. which doesn't get access to a credit card, but then really uses a product like Credivo to simplify their e-commerce purchases, whether it's over a 30-day term or a 3, 6, or 12-month installment.
Okay, now, Akshay, when you borrow money, obviously through a bank, the key word is, know your customer. And, how, in terms of, who can apply for this, who can register, and the kind of, paperwork or documentation that you have to be able to, give basically before you are eligible for the credit. I mean, how does it actually work? And also, is there kind of like a cap or a ceiling of how much you can borrow? And what does that entail? What are the conditions for you in order to be able to be given that loan?
Sure. Great point, first of all, Leslie, you're absolutely right. When you actually work with a bank and you're taking any kind of a loan of any kind, whether it's a credit card or a home loan or a car loan, the key word for a bank is KYC, know your customer. Right now, we take that very seriously as well, while we're not offering home loans or car loans, right? At the end of the day, anytime a customer wants to borrow from you, you need to know the customer pretty well. The difference between us and the traditional banks today is that while the banks are still primarily relying on typically offline processes that were instituted about 20, 30 years ago to know their customer through a set of documents and so on, we rely primarily on digital processes, right? So when a customer is actually applying, we're querying the customer in the credit bureau, right, fully online. The customer himself or herself is giving us access to some data. We also do data partnerships with a number of data providers in the country, such as telcos or e-commerce merchants, with all of whom, right, we have data partnerships that are fully compliant with the law, right? So none of this is personally identifiable data, but it's anonymized data that goes into custom credit scores that are then provided to us. So through a variety of means, whether it's by cross-referencing the National KTP database or the credit bureau, or by querying telcos, and doing a bunch of other things that we actually do, video KYC, for example, right? All of these things really go towards helping us solve for that KYC problem. So it's a very complex problem, and it's a very deep question, right? But what companies like us have really started doing is, just in summary, I think essentially digitizing that process and making it significantly more rich in terms of data than the traditional banks. And that's why, Desi, I mean, we're now at a point where, again, I can't speak for others, but I think a big reason for our success is that whether it's our KYC or our risk management, our metrics are now consistently in line with the credit card portfolio metrics of a top 5 bank in the country. In fact, we work with some of the largest banks in the country that provide us the funding that we actually disburse to merchants when customers borrow from us. And the only reason that they're doing that, right, and some of these are public relationships, we've announced them in the past, for Martha Bank, for example, and then there's a few others as well that we work with very closely. The only reason they do that is that the quality of risk metrics that they see in our portfolios are no different from their own portfolios.
Okay.
So the core point here is that, look, technology-led KYC, technology-led credit scoring works at scale, and we're showing that. Okay.
Akshay, before we go to break, just a quick question on exactly that point. Non-performing loan is something that, for the bank, it's a nightmare. Since Credivo was founded in 2016 until now, tell us a little bit about, defaults and NPLs and so on. Have you?
Sure. Yeah, look, I mean, since we were founded in early 2016, I mean, we've now disbursed north of $2 billion US. In fact, the number is closer to about 2.5. So that would be what? That would actually be about 40 trillion rupiah or so, right? If my math is correct, right? To date, and it's accelerating. Now, over time, obviously, our non-performing loan metrics and so on have improved, right? It takes a while to build a high-quality credit risk engine, right? So today, just to give you a sense of our portfolio metrics, I mean, look, we see on-time repayment rates of nearly 90%, 90%.
90?
In line with any top bank's credit card portfolio. Yeah, I mean, on-time repayment rates of 90%. Our loss rates, which is whatever we write off of any cohort, is in the region of 3.5%, 3 to 4% or so in that zone. Our NPL ratio, which is a generally spoken about ratio in the market, would be about 2.5% or so. These are numbers that are, competitive with any major bank's unsecured lending portfolio.
Okay, Akshay, we're going to take a little break, but we will get back to you. So don't go anywhere. Tetaplah bersama kami. Kita akan kembali setelah yang berikut ini. Ya, pesatnya kemajuan teknologi dalam era industri 4.0 dengan big data, artificial intelligence, dan internet of all things tentu membuat cara kita bertransaksi menjadi sangat cepat dan efisien. Bukan saja di masa depan, tapi mulai dari sekarang. Dan dampak dari pandemi COVID-19 yaitu adanya perubahan ekosistem dan juga perubahan perilaku di masyarakat, khususnya ketika melakukan transaksi. Ya, transaksi sekarang sudah mulai serba digital. Lewat Zoom saya ditemani oleh Ketua Umum Kadin Indonesia untuk periode 2021-2026, Arsyad Rashid. Halo Pak Arsyad, apa kabar? Sehat?
Halo Mbak Desi.
Work from
Salam
home.
sehat.
Lagi work from home? Kita sekarang semua.
I'm at Kadin office actually.
Oke, tapi sekarang sebenarnya bisa bekerja di mana saja, kapan saja. Yang penting ada sambungan Wi-Fi. Pak Arsyad, kita lihat dalam 1,5 adanya pandemi COVID ini, ada beberapa industri yang memang terpaksa gulung tikar atau mengurang ya pendapatannya, tapi juga ada yang meningkat begitu pesat. Tadi kita sudah mendengarkan dari CEO dari Finaxel bahwa khususnya fintech itu meningkat begitu drastis. Nah, Pak Arsyad, bagaimana menurut Pak Arsyad mengenai pinjaman online yang semakin marak? Apa yang harus kita amati dan juga kira-kira tantangan terbesarnya dengan adanya industri fintech ini? Silakan.
Thank you Mbak Desi. Pertama-tama bahwa kalau kita bicara fintech ini adalah sesuatu yang memang menjadi, saya katakan, menjadi realitas baru kita. Karena dengan apalagi dengan adanya pandemi ini, kita ini mempunyai norma baru, realitas baru, dunia baru. Nah, Kadin Indonesia sendiri sebagai rumah daripada pengusaha yang dari tingkat mikro, kecil, menengah, sampai besar, menyambut sekali sebetulnya dengan adanya pengembangan daripada yang dinamakan sebagai fintech. Ya. Di mana pada Kadin saat ini, Mbak Desi, ya, bahwa kita membuat 2 badan sebetulnya kalau bicara mengenai digital ya. Pertama adalah Badan Pengembangan Keuangan Digital dan satu lagi adalah Badan Pengembangan Ekosistem Digital. Jadi 2 badan ya. Membedakannya adalah satu digital kita bicara fintech dan satu bicara non fintech gitu. Karena kalau kita melihat dari konteks regulasinya, yang fintech itu akan more regulated dan yang namanya so-called non-financial technology gitu ya. Nah jadi kenapa sampai Kadin juga membuat 2 badan ini, karena memang it is the reality of today dan memang ini adalah menjadi the future gitu. Apalagi kalau kita bicara Kadin Indonesia ini juga fokus terhadap pengembangan daripada UMKM. Jadi kalau kita bicara SME, kecil, mikro, kecil dan menengah, sekarang ini memang the easiest way actually is menggunakan teknologi. Nah, namun tantangan yang ada sekarang ini dan juga kenapa kita menjadi perhatian untuk kita adalah pertama, Indonesia ini masih banyak yang namanya informal businesses ataupun informal entrepreneurs ataupun banyak dari teman saudara-saudara kita, sahabat-sahabat kita semua ini di bangsa ini masih yang namanya underbank atau katakanlah more than that is actually unbanked. Nah, unbanknya ini kenapa? Karena tadi akses terhadap yang namanya banking facilities. Nah, bagaimana kita bisa mengembangkan UMKM tanpa kita ataupun bagaimana bicara menyeluruh mengembangkan ekonomi Indonesia khusus UMKM tanpa kita menggunakan yang namanya masuk ke dalam fintech ini. Jadi dari konteks Kadin sendiri melihatnya sekarang ini kalau lihat beberapa studi ya. Studi yang ada dari World Bank, dari sini, bicara angkanya bisa berbeda-beda, namun kurang lebih antara 50-70% itu masih dikatakan sebagai populasi Indonesia masih unbanked ataupun underbanked, gitu ya. Jadi memang ini adalah bagaimana we want to make sure kalau kita bicara mengenai ekonomi kerakyatan, kalau kita bicara kesejahteraan daripada ekonomi, kita harus make sure that everyone di Indonesia itu akhirnya itu adalah semuanya bank, yaitu bukan unbanked lagi, becoming bankability. Ya. Nah dari situ Mbak, kita bicara tantangan ini, saya rasa digital teknologi ini akan menjawab itu. Jadi memang akhirnya we have to follow through this process, dan ini adalah menjadi sesuatu hal yang sangat penting untuk perkembangan daripada ekonomi Indonesia.
Iya, tapi kalau dari Pak Arsyad, dari segi regulasinya itu sendiri, apalagi ini kan semua berbasis teknologi lah, bahkan kalau kita tadi bicara mengenai your customer, know your customer dan lain sebagainya, ada aspek tentu saja yang dimana kita harus lebih hati-hati supaya tidak terjadi fraud, supaya sistemnya itu juga aman dan lain sebagainya. Kira-kira regulasi yang kita miliki saat ini untuk mendukung fintech ini dan pengawasan misalnya di bawah OJK, apakah cukup? Karena ini akan menjadi suatu bisnis yang berkembang itu luar biasa pesatnya.
Betul, tetapi juga sebelum kita menuju kepada regulasi digital sendiri, kita mesti mundur satu langkah. Satu langkahnya kalau kita bicara tadi, a lot of Indonesian, katakan SME itu masih juga yang namanya informal. Nah kita harus bawa dari informal menjadi formal, supaya apa? Masalah data tadi ya. Jadi contohnya dengan Undang-Undang Cipta Kerja, sekarang ini yang baru dienak dan dengan adanya OSS ya, yang baru juga diluncurkan oleh pemerintah melewati BKPM, ini sangat membantu. Dan karena apa? Karena kita bicara di sini adalah bagaimana membuat informal jadi formal supaya lebih mudah membuat institusi ataupun entitasnya, harus membuat misalnya PP-nya, CV-nya, sekarang mudah sekali. Karena apa? Tadi bisa pakai OSS. Ya. Nah dengan demikian pendataan mulai masuk. Nah disinilah dari informal kita akan masukkan ke formal. Itu mulai dari situ dulu. Nah, jadi ada Undang-Undang Cipta Kerja ini akan membantu itu, apalagi dengan OSS-nya. Ya, jadi semua perizinan akan mudah, hanya beberapa menit sudah bisa. Nah, dengan demikian sudah mulai ada pendataan awal. Karena selama ini pendataan awalnya itu yang juga sulit, karena tadi masih yang so-called informal kebanyakan. Nah, dengan adanya Undang-Undang Cipta Kerja ini itu membuka itu. Nah, itu yang pertama. Yang kedua adalah memang baru masuk ke dalam konteks regulasinya sendiri. Ya, regulasi sendiri ini kita tidak bisa bicara hanya dalam satu konteks mengenai regulatory di dalam OJK atau Bank Indonesia, tapi juga kita melihat akses misalnya contohnya kepada Dukcapil, karena kebanyakan daripada akses datanya itu ada di Kementerian Dalam Negeri. Nah, regulasi-regulasi ini memang karena teknologi sangatlah pesat, biasanya regulasinya malah terlambat. Dan itu fakta, dan bukan hanya di Indonesia, tapi di seluruh dunia, Mbak, gitu kan, sama gitu. Nah, makanya kenapa kita sebagai Kadin kita membuat badan pengembangan untuk namanya keuangan digital dan juga badan ekosistem digital, supaya tadi mengantisipasi bahwa akan terjadi banyak yang namanya conversion of regulasi ya dengan adanya teknologi ini semua ini. Jadi memang ini berkejar-kejar nih, bisnisnya duluan, regulasinya belakangan. Ya, nah dengan demikian ini dengan adanya badan ini kita berharap kita akan meminta teman-teman membuka ekosistem dari digital economy dan juga yang namanya dari sisi financial economy digitalnya untuk sama-sama nih kita membuat ini, sama-sama memberikan masukan kepada pemerintah dan juga kepada DPR mengenai hal-hal regulasi, undang-undang dan lain-lain yang dibutuhkan gitu. Dan juga kadang-kadang we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Kita juga bisa melihat regulasi di luar, kira-kira mau gimana nih, tinggal kita membawanya terhadap versi Indonesia.
Iya, dan ini masalah keamanan dan hal-hal yang berkaitan dengan security tentu sangat penting ya Pak Arsyad. Kalau kita bagaimana memastikan juga supaya perusahaan-perusahaan fintech ini sendiri itu semua kredibel agar ya tidak terjadi fraud, penipuan dan lain sebagainya. Bagaimana dan supaya ini semua bisa ekosistemnya berkembang dengan sehat, tapi pada waktu yang sama konsumennya juga tetap terlindungi dan juga teredukasi memilih mana produk-produk yang tepat dan bisa dipertanggungjawabkan.
Betul sekali Mbak Desi, rightly to say. bahwa memang kita ini harus menjaga dua-duanya, the supplier and the demand side kan ya, dua-duanya, yaitu si klien atau si customer dan juga pemberi tadi kredit tadi kan ya, harus kita make sure. Nah, dengan demikian makanya kenapa kita membawa teman-teman fintech ini semua harus regulated, harus masuk ke OJK. Makanya berbeda, saya katakan bahwa untuk financial technology itu akan lebih regulated karena masalah tanggung jawab tadi, masalah data tadi, dan juga akses terhadap data yang akhirnya yang juga sedang kita lakukan sekarang ini kan ada nantinya undang-undang mengenai privacy ya. Nah, ini juga menjadi kunci ke depan karena kan tidak bisa nih sekarang ini data-data pribadi istilahnya diperjualbelikan. Nah, karena ada hak daripada individu gitu. Nah, ini pun undang-undangnya nantinya akan keluar. Nah, di sisi ini memang banyak di PR kita. Yang tadi rightly you said it, bahwa bagaimana make sure bahwa kedua-duanya mempunyai hak yang tepat dan mempunyai tanggung jawab. Gitu. Kita tidak bisa melihat hanya sikap konsumernya, tapi juga harus bisa melihat kepada perusahaan itu. Itu sih, masih banyak PR-nya.
Masih banyak PR-nya. Baik, terima kasih banyak Pak Arsyad untuk insight-nya. Tetaplah bersama kami, Insight with Desi Anwar akan segera kembali. Ya, kembali bersama Insight with Desi Anwar. Saya ditemani lewat Zoom oleh Akshay Garg, CEO dan co-founder dari Finaxel. Kita berbicara mengenai online credit dan juga peer-to-peer lending dan semua hal yang berkaitan dengan fintech dan transaksi digital. Nah, Akshay, since 2016, obviously you mentioned growth has been quite exponential, partly driven by the pandemic, the COVID-19 and also our increasing reliance on all things digital. But on the whole, how's the competition been? How crowded is the market? And how do you stay ahead of the competition? And what would you say the main driver of your growth is?
Sure. It is a fairly competitive market, right? I mean, I think, again, just comes back to that point that there is a big demand or a big need for credit amongst the Gen Y and the Gen Z for e-commerce purchases as well as personal loans. So there's a number of players in the market in the buy now, pay later space. We are one of the largest ones. As I mentioned earlier, I mean, our view is that we have at least a 50% market share, if not more. We're also the leaders in the buy now, pay later payment space, which is to say that customers use us on other e-commerce merchants. The other major players tend to be in-house, where you would sign up for a buy now, pay later solution of an e-commerce merchant and just use it on that particular merchant itself. Now, in terms of competition, how we actually view it, Desi, I mean, while it's a very competitive market, I think our core focus tends to be the customer rather than the competition. We tend to be a very product and customer-centric company with the view that we should always be striving to provide our customers with the best possible user experience and the best possible product, which really ends up being a composite of how customers transact, the interest rates they pay, and then in general, the smoothness, if you will, of the repayments as well, right, when customers pay us back. So what makes our product unique, coming to your question about how do we stay ahead and what makes us win, I think it really comes down to a few factors, right? It's really a combination of our open loop business model, where customers can use Credivo to transact on 4 out of the top 5, 8 out of the top 10 e-commerce merchants, more than 300 e-commerce merchants overall, and that number is going up a lot as we expand our distribution both online and offline. We're one of the very few players in the market to offer installments of up to 12 months. It's very rare in the market. Most BNPL providers stay with 30 days or 3 months, occasionally 6 months. To my knowledge, I don't think anyone else provides 12 months. Finally, I think we also take a lot of we have a lot of focus, I would say, on providing customers with the lowest interest rates, right? So again, coming back to that point that I mentioned earlier, we charge customers 0% for 30 days, similar to a credit card, and then a relatively low interest rate of 2.6% a month when they do installments. It's really a combination of these factors, the fact that it's a credit line, that you can use it in multiple places, it's easy to use, and it's low cost, that really drives our competitive advantage in the market. So far, it's worked out quite well. I mean, our view is that as long as we keep on serving the customer well, the rest will take care of itself.
So, Akshay, when the moment comes, say, for your company, ready to go public, to do an IPO, tell me a little bit, what sort of route would you take? I mean, would you be using, some kind of special purpose vehicle in order to, bring your company public?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, we've looked at this question very closely, Desi. Our board has evaluated multiple pathways to going public. We've actually decided to go down a SPAC route. I think you might have come across this term. It's certainly a pretty hot term in the world these days, right? There are certainly some pros and cons to that approach, but we've decided to go down that path as a way to going public. So we just announced an agreement to merge with a SPAC formed by Victory Park Capital, which is a firm that we know very well, which has been one of our largest partners on the funding side of our business for some time now. And we're just tremendously excited to go down this path with them. We could have done a traditional IPO in the conventional sense, but the SPAC offers multiple advantages to us. We get a chance to go list on the NASDAQ, which is alongside or along with the NYSE, together the deepest, most sophisticated capital market anywhere in the world. We get to do it in a way which is slightly faster than a traditional IPO. But most importantly, right, I think what a SPAC really does, and which is really why our board finally decided to go down this path, is that it gives us both pricing as well as deal certainty. So SPAC is a little bit of a public-private hybrid while you are going public. In the early days, though, you need to have a very, very strong sponsor who actually writes one of the largest checks into what is called a PIPE. And then you need to actually have a whole set of private investors who come in to validate the valuation and the terms set by the sponsor. So in some ways, it keeps the entire process truthful and honest. And at the end point, what really actually happens is that a large amount of capital put together by the private investors in the PIPE comes together with capital put in by the retail market in what is known as a public trust, and comes together to the company at an end point. So it is obviously a complex process, but one that multiple high growth companies in the world are actually starting to use, including, I think, one from our region. I think Grab is very well known to go down that route as well. So that's the path that we've actually taken, and we're just very, very excited about it.
Okay, and any particular target on when you'll be going down this route, when you'll be ready to go the SPAC way?
Yeah, well, I really wish it was tomorrow, but the reality is there's a tremendous amount of work going on that front. So realistically, I think we're really looking to list sometime in Q1 next year. Oh boy, I mean, it's a lot of work going public, but we wish we could accelerate it, but it seems like Q1 will be the date.
So when it comes to, I know that you have to raise funds and you have to get investors interested, and competition is quite tough, especially when other people are doing the same thing. Just tell me a little bit, what is it that investors look for when it comes to putting their money on a startup, and what kind of numbers are they looking for? Is it the teamwork or the quality of those running the companies, or is it how big the market is, and what makes a company valuable?
Well, I think it's a combination of a few things, some of which you just mentioned. I think quality of team, I think size of market are very important, and I think you mentioned those two. I think the quality of the product, the quality of the business model, and the ability to scale end up being hugely important. So it really is. I mean, building a company is no different from building an ecosystem, because it takes a number of different things to work together in a beautiful harmony in order to make it work, which is why building startups is in general incredibly hard, and successes are few and far between. But high quality investors look for some of those things that we just spoke about a minute or so ago.
Okay, Akshay, we'll take another break, but we still have one more segment to go, so do stay with us, don't go away, tetaplah bersama kami. Insight with Desi Anwar akan segera kembali. Ya, kembali bersama Insight with Desi Anwar dan kita kembali ditemani oleh CEO dan co-founder dari Finaxel yaitu Akshay Gar, dan kita berbicara mengenai tumbuhnya fintech khususnya pada saat COVID-19 ini. Akshay, nice to have you back again. How do you mitigate that? How do you make sure that the platform, the environment, the ecosystem that you're working in, that the consumer's working in, is absolutely, safe? It's your firewalls against all these possibilities of frauds and so on.
Right. So the question that you've actually raised is a very deep question. It really goes to the heart of any financial institution, whether it's traditional or digital. We tend to approach this through a very technology and data-centric way by using a very large amount of artificial intelligence and machine learning driven technologies that sit on a tremendous amount of first-party and third-party data. And that's really how, in summary, we try and mitigate fraud and make sure that our systems also stay, just from an external perspective, stable, right? So it really is a combination of technologies and data that we use internally that really help us get to the root of this problem.
Okay. Quick question, final question. How is it? How easy it is to do business in Indonesia, and what would you like to see improved, especially when it comes to regulating and just dealing with fintech or financial technology?
Well, I mean, our experience in Indonesia has been phenomenally positive. We started out as an Indonesia first business. So in fact, Kredivo launched out of Indonesia, even though paper technically it's headquartered out of Singapore. Indonesia is our home country. The majority of our management team, the majority of our staff, of course, is all Indonesian. We actually believe that Indonesia is the clear leader when it comes to its openness towards financial technologies, the regulators' willingness to incorporate financial technologies into the existing frameworks. Right? Indonesia has taken the clear lead in the region, and we're very grateful for that. As far as working in Indonesia is concerned, look, I mean, working in every market anywhere in the world comes with its own unique sets of challenges, right? Indonesia has its own, but it's nothing that puts any major obstacles in our path. It's a large country with a lot of competition. It has a very forward-thinking regulator. It has customers who are very early to adopt the technology and very experimental. And that's what makes this one of the most fascinating markets for technology-based startups anywhere in the world. And we're just very grateful for that opportunity and very keen to serve tens of millions of customers over the next few years with products that are fast, affordable, and accessible.
Okay, Akshay, thank you very much. And it's good to end on an optimistic note about Indonesia. And let's hope we can all ride out this COVID-19 and we can continue to grow, and especially economically, and that for a company like Kredivo and financial technology such as yours can actually help us weather and ride these economic challenges. Once again, Akshay, thank you very much for your insight. Ya, demikian Insight kali ini. Jangan lupa Anda juga dapat menyaksikan tayangan ini di cnnindonesia.com dan di YouTube CNN Indonesia. Insight with Desi Anwar. Jangan lupa rajin cuci tangan, menggunakan masker, dan menghindari kerumunan karena COVID-19 masih bersama kita. Sampai jumpa, stay safe. Bye-bye.